Being a fan of comic books as a woman is hard. If you're in the space, you already know that, but if you're not, you might not realize how bleak it all is, even compared to other media. Like, sure, movies starring women are always underperforming relative to movies with male leads. Female characters in movies, books, and video games all face disproportionate scrutiny for exhibiting the same traits as men, and the rampant sexualization and casual misogyny is constant wherever you look. I'm not going to relitigate first-wave feminism here, but there's just something truly disgusting about the comics industry's treatment of women that still has yet to be reckoned with. The very same industry that was once so toxic to female supporting characters that it led to the existence of the term fridging has still, decades later, not reconciled with that fact. Scantily clad superheroines continue to be raped, beaten, abused, and reduced to romantic interests for men. Pick up any given run of Captain Marvel and there's a good chance it'll heavily feature her romantic interests and partners. If you want to read about Starfire, you can really only do it in team-up books. She's rarely the focus. The focus she does get is usually for romantic pairings, and she's usually sexualized to hell and back to boot. The shit Tom King is doing with Wonder Woman feels like a ritualistic sacrifice of a feminist icon that nobody is intervening in. Here's my backstory for you. I started reading comics during the New 52 relaunch at DC. During this universe-wide reboot, the writers opted to specifically carve out an extra 5 years of history for Batman to ensure that he could plausibly keep 4 of his 5 Robins. The only one to be cut was Stephanie Brown, the single-canon female Robin. But don't worry, she was also robbed of her history as Batgirl, along with fan-favorite Batgirl Cassandra Cain, all to facilitate Barbara Gordon returning to the Batgirl role, retconning away her status as one of DC's most prolific disabled superheroes. And as if that weren't enough, the New 52's relaunched Batgirl title was the only project in the whole slate with a female writer. Gail Simone is one of the comic industry's greatest talents, but that should not have happened. Not ever. I really like this anecdote because it's a tidy example of women being shafted all up and down the creative process. Female characters robbed of their history in favor of men, written and edited by men for an audience of men. And as these things go, even the men who criticize it can't really do that from a position of actual investment. The best they can do is give lip service to the idea that female characters deserve better without being able to speak from the perspective of a fan who's actually in the trenches. Imagine there's a big foreshadowing sign while I say all of this. Supergirl's New 52 run is a pretty mixed bag overall, with plenty not to like. Starting with the costume, what is going on there? Why are there knee windows? But one of the things I loved about this comic was its ability to depict Cara as her own character, not merely a female Superman, but a full-fledged character with a messy history of her own. She's defined by her tragedy, her outsider status, even more than Clark, who has been raised on Earth his whole life. Cara doesn't feel like she belongs and isn't sure what she wants. She doesn't see the Earth as her home, so she spends decidedly little time there. She hasn't reconciled her childhood trauma and has no one with whom to do so, and as a consequence, she gets to have one of those emotions so rarely seen in female heroes. She's angry. So angry, she kills a guy and becomes a Red Lantern, which is objectively dope, though ultimately irrelevant to this discussion. The book isn't great, I'd argue, but it's authentic in a way that a lot of New 52 books didn't really feel. It offered Cara this unique trajectory as a character, a promising direction that would avoid some of the pitfalls of old. For so long, Cara was just the plucky young upstart, Clark's younger cousin in a crop top. Despite watching the DC animated universe shows like everyone my age, I didn't really like her character in Justice League because she felt so juvenile. Always seeking to impress men, dressed in a tight-fitting t-shirt, like the archetypal embodiment of the female hero, sexualized, youthful, and just not as good as the men around her. Oh, right, this video is about the movie. Fuck. Look, I won't pretend I don't have a horse in this race. I wanted the movie to be good. I got excited for it. I bought all the merch and the popcorn bucket and the KFC action figures. But nonetheless, the response to this movie has driven me insane in ways I thought impossible. Keep in mind, this is a movie of the cape shit variety, the genre that's given us such gems as Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, which, hey, the same variety writer who would later go on a multi-article tear against Supergirl insisted was pretty fun. That's weird. I've been here for a while, man. I've seen the utter depths of shit these movies have to offer. Thor 5, No Way Home, Deadpool and Wolverine. All of these are recent and all of them are terrible. But Supergirl made one mistake those movies didn't. It had a woman in the lead. Ooh, boy, that's a pretty inflammatory statement, huh? Misogyny accusations? How do I expect to have a meaningful and honest discussion if I just call everyone who disagrees with me a misogynist? Look, I'm not going to dwell on this, but I'd better state it here. Supergirl is undeniably the target of a misogynistic hate campaign, but when I say misogyny has colored people's opinions on the movie, what I also predominantly mean here is not that people are thinking about this movie with active malice towards women, but that societal misogyny, which is so culturally ingrained, has led us to expect certain things to our media, and so an element of bias that cannot be fully accounted for is present in almost all people. This is true of all forms of bias, and awareness of it is the difference between good and bad criticism of art that deals in these areas. The fact is, I watched the movie, and it was good. I watched the movie with multiple people, and they also thought it was good, but that is not the opinion I see whenever I go online. For the past month since the movie released, all I have seen has been hate and criticism. Supergirl betrayed the comic. It's soulless. It was ruined by a single needle drop. It was disappointing. Waves of one-star reviews on Rotten Tomatoes and baffling discourse about how long is correct for a superhero to wear their costume in an origin story. And sure, these criticisms were easy to write off at first, when they came from the organized alt-right hate mob that had already made it their mission to ruin this film months before it even came out because Millie Alcock wasn't an AI-generated porn actress. But these takes were coming from people I respected, at least a little. Reviewers and critics whose content I watched and took seriously. People who I figured knew better. But then again, they were also all men, weren't they? It doesn't help that the defenses I've seen are half-hearted. They usually go something like this. Hey, the movie wasn't perfect, but it doesn't deserve the hate it's been getting. There's a lot to like about it. A lot of that phrasing, the, hey, is the movie perfect? No. And that just started to weigh on me, to get to me. So now I just have to say this. Yes, Supergirl 2026 is perfect. I wouldn't change a thing for the world. From the moment Millie Alcock's Cara Zor-El crash-landed in the ending to Superman, I have been in love with her. The immediate and striking decision to make her this much of a mess was just delightfully entrancing. It was an actual direction for her character, and a bold one at that. For years, we have not known what to make of Supergirl. Hell, DC didn't know what to do with her, and ended up retconning her out of existence for a damn long while. But adaptations have similarly been lost. Prior to this movie, I'd argue the most prolific Supergirl on screen had been that of the CW's Arrowverse, and while I haven't seen the show and have no desire to ruin it for its fans, I do find from my limited experience that a lot of the criticisms are merited. This Cara is, for all intents and purposes, a female Clark Kent. She's a reporter as her day job, an overall kind and inspiring superhero, and even comes complete with her own gender-swapped Lex Luthor, drawing from a character who in many of the comics is quite different. This Cara has a charm to a lot of people, and to be clear, I cannot speak on the show's quality, but what strikes me is that as a character, she is ultimately inoffensive. She's unproblematic, the same unfailing bastion of hope and good that Superman is. That can be fun, but it's also unattainable. I find it frustrating when the men around her are allowed to be so much more. Then, of course, there's Supergirl's role in The Flash, which... look, there's a lot going on in this movie. I think most people can agree that the casting was inspired, but I'm not sure what else I can really say here. DCEU Cara doesn't even really have a cultural influence that warrants being mentioned here, to be honest. The point is, the DCU's Cara was something new and exciting. I followed the news of her solo movie closely after that. I was hooked, and I couldn't wait to see where she'd show up next. By the time the first trailer for the movie came out, I was already excited. Amidst a sea of criticisms that owning a Walkman made your character a Star-Lord ripoff, or that Craig Gillespie was secretly James Gunn in a trench coat ripping off himself, there was something electric about the movie's vibe. Also, just a quick side note, I keep seeing people blame or praise Craig Gillespie for this movie, and, he's just the director, right? The script is by Anna Nogueira. The writing choices were made by her. Maybe I just really like Blondie, but the choice of Call Me in the trailers and as the band Cara's repping felt so right. A band defined by its female lead, by her electric energy and talent. The men around her blend into the background. She's exciting, she's energetic, she's cool. This Cara kind of fits that tone. She comes across as a sort of counterculture rebel without a cause, defiant to the end result of nothing at all. She drinks, she parties, she avoids facing her problems and living her life. Alone with a dog on a spaceship in the deep, vast abyss of space and comfortable there. But going back to fan response, the main criticisms, to worm their way into the responses to these initial trailers, almost all centered on the movie's source material, which means I probably can't avoid talking about it any longer. You see, Supergirl 2026 is an adaptation of the beloved comic Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow. I'd call it an extremely loose adaptation that takes mostly what it needs to tell its own story and leaves the rest, but we didn't know that at the time, and a lot of people seemed very attached to this book and extremely concerned about the movie's ability to live up to it. To many, this book was the gold standard of Supergirl writing, and to choose to adapt it was a significant undertaking and carried with it an equally significant responsibility to do it justice. I find the whole thing farcical, but that's showing my hand, so fine. Let's talk about Adaptation and Tom King's Woman of Tomorrow. Now, you might suspect the comic, Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow, is about Supergirl, which is a common mistake. Cara is not a character in this book. She's a larger-than-life figure of legend and myth, an imperceptible deity only able to be relayed to us in the second person. In reality, Woman of Tomorrow is about Ruthie Marie Knoll and the way her encounter with Supergirl changed her. Don't get me wrong, the book is compelling. It's certainly not bad in the way most comics are bad. Its prose, though sometimes grating and over-embellished, characteristic of King's style, is engaging. The story, admittedly less so. It's really more episodic in nature, following Cara and Ruthie as they go from planet to planet, uncovering crimes that Krem and the Brigands have left in their wake. Some of these individual stories are good, but you do find yourself catching on to the pattern, and if it isn't what you came for, you'll be waiting a while for the plot proper to progress. There's only so many times you can be shown the incredible burden of being Supergirl before you start to get bored and wish she'd share it with us directly instead of keeping it all inside. Wish she'd speak to us as a character and not merely descend to us as a helpful goddess who we can only observe through chinks in her armor. The book's greatest strength is undeniably its visual style, brought to life by artist Bilquis Everly and colorist Matt Lopez. The stunning, colorful set pieces like Cara battling a space dragon or the fantasy-inspired designs of the planets, locations, and ships. It's absolutely a visual masterpiece and deserves appreciation for that fact. I do have small problems with it, to be fair. I don't love the way they draw Cara, but that's really just personal preference, and it suits the book's intent perfectly well. And of course, praise of this book's visual identity isn't anything new. I'm not breaking new ground here, but I'm also not trying to be contrarian for the sake of it. The book is pretty, but as I've said before, and will again, the book style is designed with its medium in mind. It's drawn and inked and colored as a comic book. Any attempt to convert it into live action would inevitably involve compromises and stylistic changes, and I think it's equally, if not more, respectable to try and change the visual identity to suit the movie's different tone and story than it would be to try and force the style to work and balloon the film's budget in the process. Anyway, the point is, Woman of Tomorrow is a visually gorgeous book, yes. Those visuals are sometimes in service of the story, and do stand to enhance what would otherwise be a pretty mundane trip from planet to planet. These isolated stories wouldn't land nearly as well without the work to make each one feel like a distinct and memorable experience, and the art is really hard carrying that effort. We'll talk more about the book's ending when the movie's take on it comes up, but a few more things I want to pick up on that were changed in the movie. Krem is initially just a random scoundrel who only joins up with the Brigands partway through Woman of Tomorrow's story, a move I find frankly very odd. The Brigands are the force that actually do things in the story, an organization big enough to cause trouble on a massive scale. I suppose it's fair to say that this allows Krem as a character to gradually evolve from a random thug to a genuine threat over the course of the story, but we never actually see that happening, and overall it doesn't seem like anyone could argue it's a bad change for him to just be a part of them from the start. Cara and Ruthie's journey is very much one of following after Krem, always arriving just in his wake. This is kind of annoying from a pacing standpoint, but the tonal implications of this are that almost every chapter involves our heroes showing up at the site of a tragedy too late to stop it. At most, Cara throws up her hands in anger at the injustice she was too late to stop, or she does a small good deed to marginally ease the grief of the survivors. But this is an intensely pessimistic story. Like, the first planet they go to, they discover a racial genocide has been committed, and it's just too late for them to do anything about it. A racial minority has already been scrubbed off the face of the planet. Bleak. Ultimately, I don't care for Woman of Tomorrow. There's a lot I do enjoy and appreciate, obviously chief amongst them being its artistic style, but I find it lacking overall as a story about Supergirl. It bears all the hallmarks of King's writing, for better and for worse, and frankly, it doesn't feel like a story about Kara Zor-El so much as a story about the platonic ideal of heroism. The idea that this comic is the best Supergirl story, or even as some have put it, the only good one, is farcical to me. If it's the best, it's only because everything else is worse, and that's no cause for celebration. Side note, I will give the comic this at least. Kara's suit doesn't have a crop top for once, and that's a breath of fresh air. The suit is probably the best Supergirl costume in any of the comics I've read, and that makes me very happy that the movie faithfully recreated it. But yeah, other than that, I'm not what you'd call this book's biggest fan. But guess what? That specific opinion is entirely irrelevant to this movie, so whether you think my dislike of the book is sacrilege or not, it has no bearing on the quality of the work we're here to discuss. You might be wondering how my opinion on the movie's source material can be unimportant here, but the fact is that the movie just isn't concerned with adapting the comic directly, and I find that to be unambiguously the correct decision. Especially when we're talking about the first outing for this version of Cara, I can't think of a worse introduction than the book where she is the paragon of virtue, imparting her wisdom on a young girl with basically no room to develop for herself. You might say that this makes the book the wrong choice to adapt at all, but the movie isn't really pulling all that much from it, so I don't really mind. What it does borrow is done with intention, remixing the story into something that works as a first outing. The story of how Cara became a hero. Now, when James Gunn announced the slate of projects for the first DCU wave, he did initially call this project Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow, and stated in both marketing and press releases that it was an adaptation of the book. And to be clear, it obviously is. Ruthie and Krem have never appeared outside this book in the DC Comics universe, and the overall plot of Ruthie seeking revenge and Cara saving Krypto are carried over from the book. That's about where the similarities end, but frankly, that's fine. Remember, if you will, that Superman 2025 was billed as an adaptation of All-Star Superman, and it shares almost nothing in common with that story except vibes. Sure, the parallels are more direct here, but it certainly feels like hypocrisy from comic fans when they say they're betrayed by this adaptation not being faithful. The pearl clutching about how this adaptation somehow ruined an otherwise beautiful work of art feels utterly forced. The fact of the matter is this: a bunch of fans of the comic convinced themselves that this movie would be a direct, one-to-one adaptation of the comic, and then got mad when it wasn't. Unfortunate for them as that may be, it has no bearing whatsoever on the quality of the movie, and to pretend that it does is a dishonest criticism. For one thing, I think believing this movie was ever going to adapt Woman of Tomorrow was always foolish, for the reasons outlined above. Woman of Tomorrow is something of a final story for Supergirl in much the same way as All-Star Superman is a final story for Clark, and you simply do not see an equivalent response to that movie. You can argue that the visuals are too muted, too much less vibrant than a comic, but again, you're being unrealistic here. Unless you want to put every CGI artist on the planet into a sweatshop full-time and release this movie after the heat death of the universe, you aren't recreating that visual style in live action, and anyone who honestly thought it would happen is kidding themselves. This movie was never going to look like the comic, and so a decision was wisely made to tailor its aesthetic to something more achievable in live action, which it did well. It shares so much of its visual DNA with Star Wars and Guardians of the Galaxy, and never once are those films dogged on for their very purposeful aesthetic choices. Supergirl, like Star Wars, is dirty and run down and muted because that's the vibe of the film and the nature of its locations. Take, for instance, the Brigand ships. In the comics, they're these fantasy-inspired crafts, and that's admittedly very cool. Rather than seeking to recapture a very deliberate aesthetic style that would be doubtlessly uncanny in live action, the movie went for a different approach, a much more grounded and familiar grungy style that some outlets described as reminiscent of Mad Max, which I think absolutely works both for the movie's overall stylistic tone and the Brigand's identity in this movie's retelling. Whether you like this less or more than the comic, it's the right choice for the movie. And if you're upset by that, well, great news. The comic is still around for you to read. In fact, DC has made it exceptionally easy to get your hands on lately, so you really don't have an excuse. Whether this movie is a bad adaptation of Woman of Tomorrow or not doesn't even matter, ultimately, because I'd argue a good movie should stand on its own regardless of influence. Here's the reality. Comics are art, as valid a form of creative expression as any other. And if that's true, and you believe Woman of Tomorrow is an outstanding work of art, it should have no need to be adapted into another medium. I'd say the book's greatest strengths come from being a comic, the impossible aesthetics of the spacecrafts and planets, the colors and atmosphere that cannot possibly be translated into live action. These visual elements are what make the book exceptional, and those qualities are afforded to it by virtue of it being a comic book, and not a live-action movie relying on overworked VFX staff. Directly adapting Woman of Tomorrow into another medium would not only be realistic, but inevitably worse. I know for a fact this is true because DC's animated movie universe has spent years adapting decent Batman comics and making them worse. All this does is undermine the original work's quality. But hell, if you really want a one-to-one adaptation in another medium for no reason, Disney's new Moana has your ass covered. Perhaps this movie's existence means another adaptation more faithful to Woman of Tomorrow is impossible, and if that's the case, I consider it a blessing. A DC animated movie universe take on this comic would be horrible, and we all know it. So, what, I have to ask, did you people want from this? My point here is this. Whether or not this movie is a faithful adaptation of the comic does not matter to discussion of if it is a good story or not, and the focus on its quality as a direct adaptation is not only willfully missing the point and refusing to meet the movie where it's at, it's a direct result of comic book purism, a misguided belief steeped in fallacy that any of these capeshit movies ought to stick as closely as possible to the original works they're taking from, and that deviation from that standard is a lack of quality or even willful ignorance or malice on the writer's part. For all the reasons outlined at the beginning of this discussion, I think upholding the comic industry as flawless and beyond improvement is a good way to get worse stories. A dying industry surviving off stunts like event comics, constant character deaths and resurrections, and overwhelmingly defined by a boys' club attitude is not the medium you want to be treating as a golden calf. Comic book purism is a disease, and if we let it grow, the work we will see come from it will be worse, all but inevitably. So let's be honest critics for a moment and meet the movie on its own terms. The movie opens really strong, in my opinion. I love the opening montage as it immediately sets the stage for Cara's character and introduces us to her core traits, drinking herself into a stupor, avoiding the earth like the plague, and loving her dog more than anything in the world. It's just fast-paced enough to set that stage without overstaying its welcome or being confusing, and This Summer by the Sleigh Bells is an undeniable bop. Creme and Ruthie's introduction is similarly strong, a tense scene that's properly paced and immediately makes Creme a terrifying presence and Ruthie a tragic one. It's not rocket science, but it does what it needs to at the perfect pace to get the ball rolling. If I had to complain about something, it's that we don't see Ruthie get away from Creme and his gang, which could have been interesting and does leave me wondering how she did that. But I think it's the right move narratively, as we don't want Ruthie to appear particularly exceptional just yet. In her meeting with Cara, she has to be clearly out of her league, a young girl playing in an area she doesn't understand. I'm not going to go scene by scene like this for the whole movie, but this whole intro section leads into my favorite moment, which is the opening bar fight. This is great, of course, because it's a microcosm of Cara's character arc. She initially writes off helping Ruthie as not her business, but even depowered, she can't help herself, can't turn a blind eye to injustice, and ends up in a fight for Ruthie's sake where she's at a clear disadvantage. It's great, and it also perfectly sets us up for Cara's ingenuity as a fighter even without her powers. Not only that, but at the same time, she gets pretty banged up in this fight, and only succeeds because Krypto helps out. Cara isn't invincible, and this movie isn't allergic to letting its female lead be punched by bigger, stronger opponents just because it makes men in the audience uncomfortable. I saw reviews from men, of course, honestly saying that they thought the movie wasn't fit for kids or made them uncomfortable seeing a woman get hurt, and frankly, that's just... God, that's insane. We have so far to go as a society. Similarly, the next scene is equally delightful. Cara is hungover, she's a mess, and the movie isn't trying to pretty up that fact just because she's a woman. It's actively funny. The same way it's funny and a little sad when a male character is hungover and pathetic. She falls asleep on the toilet. It's wonderful. Like, yes, this is a tiny detail, but so many fucking movies and shows are afraid to let their female characters be a little bit messy and gross. And this movie just doesn't do any of that. Bare minimum maybe, but it's so damn refreshing. Krypto being poisoned here was inevitably going to be a tearjerker of a moment because he's a cute dog, but the choice to center the story on him also allows us a direct line to Cara's heart. To her, Krypto is everything about her childhood. He's the last memory of Krypton, of her mother. He's childish innocence and joy. He's playful and badly behaved, yet so full of love for her. Stripping her of his presence immediately brings down Cara's walls and lets us as an audience see her fully vulnerable. So, okay, we eventually get our odd couple teamed up and after their goals, so let's talk about that. Ruthie's goal is to find and kill Creme. She's single-minded in this, obviously, because she's an angry child with a grief bigger than she should ever have to bear and hasn't thought about it yet. She's angry in that way freshly wounded kids so often are. She wants to take the life of a man who has ruined her childhood, but she can't conceive of the cost. Cara knows the cost, knows what it will do to her, but Cara is a messy person, still avoiding healing in self-destructing ways herself, so she can't communicate that to her, and inevitably the two are at odds. Ruthie is impulsive, much to Cara's frustration. Her determination is at once her greatest asset, the reason Cara stays alive, in fact, and a liability, causing Cara to have to go out of her way to protect her. Ruthie never feels like a burden. She feels appropriately like the soul of this journey, because it's all about her. She's angry and troubled, but never hard to understand, to see where she's coming from. She feels helpless, and so she admires Cara's power, but can't help but fear the person it's attached to be uncertain about her. For Cara, everything is about crypto, the last piece of her home, the blessing she found on the day of her mother's funeral. A repeated motif for Cara is home. She says Earth is not her home, only Clark's. She wonders if a red sun planet might be home, somewhere where she has no powers, no responsibility to be a hero. But when crypto is hit, she immediately drops all pretense. Home is wherever you are, buddy, she says. For Cara, this is about saving her home, a mission so critical and so single-minded that she isn't able to initially be there for Ruthie in the way the girl needs. That is, until she sees the state of things. The choice to make the brigands child traffickers is a big one, and to a lot of people I'm sure it comes off as in poor taste as a gut reaction. But I'd argue it is the perfect foil for this story. This story about girlhood, about two women who were denied it, confronts inevitably the exploitation of women, of girls, as a systemic problem. Just as Cara and Ruthie's individual traumas have had their girlhoods, their childhoods ripped from them, so do the brigands stand to rob that childhood from every girl they come across. This is the thing Cara has to save, to allow these girls to live their lives just as she's been trying to do for Ruthie. There's no better villain for this story. Plenty of people whined that Krem isn't a particularly engaging villain, partially because he's not physically intimidating or a match for a fully powered Supergirl, but also in no small part because he's just not an iconic reoccurring supervillain. And to that I simply say, man, I don't need every villain to be Lex Luthor, Brainiac, or Sinestro. Krem's thematic weight, the evil he represents, makes him far more of a foil to Cara than Lana Luthor or somebody like that would have. The thing about Krem that makes him so horrifying is, as I've seen many people say after the movie, he represents a kind of anti-feminist horror that directly parallels the two main characters' journey to liberation. If Cara and Ruthie are mourning their lost girlhood, trying to make up for the harm that was done to them somehow, then Krem is the direct force robbing that innocence from girls, and girls specifically. The brigands are apparently an all-male race, and so to repopulate, they take child brides. This is pretty serious subject matter, and I do feel the film deals in it well. It isn't a stupid power fantasy like Sound of Freedom, to which I've seen this film disingenuously compared. The traffic girls get one sort of hero moment in the final battle, and it's really just a send-off for them as everything wraps up. The use of this subject matter, I think, is very important in the repeated themes of innocence and loss, that specific form of loss of childhood that specifically targets women. It allows the movie to tread in feminist themes without beating you over the head with them, without making a shallow girl power movie that avoids addressing the real issues. Cara is a character able to be defined by her womanhood and not traditionally feminine at the same time, to be empowered without being cheesy. It's the sort of thing that benefits from the script of this movie being written by a woman, perhaps, which again sets it apart from Woman of Tomorrow. Again, subtlety really does this topic a lot of justice. When Cara hears about the brigands' goals, she doesn't turn to the camera and decry this injustice as an unforgivable abuse against women. She just scoffs and moves on. Because Cara lives in this universe, the systematized abuse and mistreatment of women is known to her. She finds it abhorrent, of course, but her actions can speak for themselves. The film, maybe wrongly, trusts its audience to recognize that as well. Alright, anyways, let's talk about Lobo. One of my biggest concerns for the movie prior to its release was the presence of Lobo, and this frustration continued after my first viewing. Lobo isn't in the original Woman of Tomorrow comic, though some reports say he was planned to be at one point. His presence here seemed to serve two purposes, the first being that Jason Momoa really wanted to play Lobo as soon as humanly possible, and the second being that the presence of this male character would entice certain audiences to a movie they'd otherwise skip. And hey, it worked. On every trailer, the top comments I saw were all about praising Momoa's Lobo, even when he was only on screen for a picosecond. And make no mistake, Lobo is here for that reason, but upon my second viewing I actually got a lot more respect for the thematic purpose he serves. One of Lobo's defining traits is his utter indifference to morality, a lack of the usual noble code possessed by this sort of bounty hunter character. He's hyper-violent, hyper-masculine, a jackass reveling in the chaos he brings. And that sort of utter lack of restraint, lack of respect for life and justice is what makes him the perfect foil to Cara as a teacher for Ruthie. In him, she sees the type of person she might end up if she pursues violence here, the same thing Cara has been begging her not to. Ruthie has been unable to understand why Cara is so opposed to this killing, this clearly righteous act of vengeance. Cara, for her part, lacks the ability to verbally convey why she feels this way either. She just knows deep down that killing Krem will not bring Ruthie peace. But as a result of their own flaws, this inability to understand each other keeps mounting. Lobo is happy to offer Ruthie an alternative. He says, of course she should kill Krem, not for justice or for peace or anything, but because she wants to, and that's reason enough. He doesn't promise it will fix her, but he doesn't have any interest in something so nebulous as preserving her innocence. I fucking love the scene with Ruthie and Lobo in the Brigand's prison, where Ruthie says Krem killed her father for no reason, and Lobo insists he must have had a reason. So when Ruthie says he did it just for sport, Lobo shrugs and says, that's a reason? Because to him, so cold and distant from attachment and emotion, that's really all it is, a semantics game. Krem had a reason to kill him, so of course he did. It encapsulates his narrative purpose, shows Ruthie what she stands to become if she stays this course. Remember, Lobo isn't even after Krem, and he's actively baffled why Ruthie is, since there's no money in it, there's no active bounty on his head. Ruthie has a reason to want revenge right now, and it's a pretty good one, but if she gives into it this time, she runs the risk of ending up the same way, of throwing away her humanity and being like Lobo. It's reflected in her attitude, the way she initially seems thrilled at the prospect of allying with someone as strong as Lobo, only to end up ditching him at the end of the story. His role is to represent the compromises Ruthie would be making for her justice. The only thing I don't love about Lobo is that for most of this movie, I feel like they do a pretty good job of not letting him make jabs at Cara without her getting him back. But when he leaves the final battle, he says, "See ya, dits," while Kara's already in a state of vulnerability, and I don't feel like that landed especially well. It feels like the one time the script leans too far into Lobo being an asshole without being likable, for me. I do like when she does the Valley Girl voice to get him to leave, though. That was pretty cool. The main thing I really respect about the film's use of Lobo is how restrained it is. He's a popular character played by a popular actor, and they really could have leaned on that prestige and had him be in a big chunk of the movie, but his role is decidedly limited. He's in a few scenes when he needs to be and serves his narrative purpose, and then he leaves. He never overstays his welcome or risks making the movie more about him. He is unabashedly a supporting character in Cara and Ruthie's story, and his role reflects that status. It takes an incredible amount of restraint to commit to that when you know how it will resonate with certain audience members, so I really respect that they had enough confidence in the film's quality not to jangle keys for the audience by keeping Lobo around in every scene. Speaking of minor male supporting characters, the same is true with Clark. He's in the movie a perfect amount for the role he plays. Obviously, David is perfect as Superman, and it's a treat every time we get to see him. He's a scene stealer. But I wouldn't have wanted him in the movie any more than he is. It's just not his movie, and I'm glad they were confident enough in Cara as a character to not rely on her more popular cousin to carry the film. He's great when he's there, but his main purpose is to represent the hopeful, almost naive optimism that Cara respects but feels is unattainable for her. At the end of the movie, her joining up with him is the culmination of her journey, and it's awkward because they still aren't on the same page yet. It sets things up perfectly to move forward in Man of Tomorrow. As far as main characters, that's really all we've got, unless you want to count these cool space pirate ladies or the funny Seth Rogen alien. As far as supporting characters go, probably the strongest are the family that run one of the bars Cara looks for information at, who end up trying to poison her in exchange for the brigands releasing their daughter. I kind of appreciate that the desperation they feel is obviously the reason they do this, but the performances show how clearly uncomfortable they are with the whole thing. It's not something they want to do, and ultimately the husband cracks almost as soon as they actually try to poison Cara. It's not a substantial role, but it really shows the way normal people in this situation end up. They can't fight the brigands without ending up like Ruthie's parents, but in exchange, they give up their daughters, a sacrifice that's life-destroying. It contrasts really well with Kara's father and the choice he makes to die in order to preserve her life and have a hopeful future for her. Now, these characters and their daughter do all end up dead during the ensuing fight scene, which is the catalyst for the film's single strongest beat in my opinion, but I've seen some criticism call out that this black family is all killed off, and that's very fair to criticize. I also want to give this ensuing fight a lot of credit. It's extremely hectic and jumps all over the place, which is perfect for a fight that can both seem triumphant at points and ultimately still lead to the lowest point for all of our characters. Once again, this fight makes really good use of Cara being somehow inebriated and unable to fully use her powers, so she isn't just thrashing these guys. And this time, rather than her own vices, she's actually being punished for trusting somebody else, which is a fun twist on that as well, and continues the slow process of Cara taking a more heroic and less self-destructive turn, while also leaning into how fun it is that she's this much of a mess as a person, which Millie does really well at portraying. The scene after this fight is what really gets me, though. A lot of movies that have this unlikely team-up do this sort of end-of-second-act twist where they break up somehow, and in this movie it isn't due to a misunderstanding, but because each character's vices have reached their boiling point. Ruthie's desire for violent revenge and unwillingness to listen to Cara lead her to become fully disillusioned with her, causing her to say things that she doesn't mean and almost immediately regretting it. Cara's single-minded mission to save her dog has led to an innocent family being killed. Her being distracted and frustrated have made her blind to the scale of the conflict she's gotten involved in, and now people are hurting. In the wake of this despair, Cara flies into space, overwhelmed by emotion. For a moment, she just floats there before letting out a scream at full force. We don't hear it, of course, by design, but the moment's vulnerability, angst, and power doesn't need that. It gives me chills, man, every time. Immediately after, Cara crashes back down, furious and determined, but also blinded by her own feelings even more than ever, dead set on doing things alone, which leads to her ending up in the most weakened state she's ever in at any point in the movie, as she's taken to a planet with a green sun and left to die. This reveal was fucking fantastic, by the way. This whole movie, they have these little introductory cards to each planet and its local sun, and that's just helpful enough information that you kind of just write it off, and then they get to use that same format for this big reveal of the green sun, and it really does make your stomach drop. I don't know, I just thought it was cool. Ruthie arrives to try and hide Cara in a cave, but it seems like that won't help things. And here we get the strongest emotional moment of the film for me. Ruthie immediately regrets what she said, sits with it and thinks, and we get a sense for how much emotional wisdom she actually has when she's thinking clearly. She tells Cara, echoing her mother's words, that she isn't always nice, but she's kind, that she isn't always perfect, but she's good. And that's the point, of course. That's the whole movie right there. Cara is a messy, traumatized, angry, conflicted person. She isn't Superman. She isn't perfect. She isn't always there to save the day with a reassuring smile. She isn't the shining example of a feminine hero, always there to soothe the emotions of the men around her, always the emotional and moral paragon. But in spite of that, she's still a hero. She's still kind. She's still good. She still seeks to do the right thing, even when it's hard, even when it costs her so much. The scene also pays off the repeated "don't freak out" line for the final time, which I thought was really cute. It's such a specifically non-formal phrase that it really feels like Ruthie adopting it here shows how Cara has rubbed off on her, in direct contrast to her earlier outbursts that she doesn't want to be like her. I also really like that Ruthie brings the suit to Cara in this moment, and while Cara initially rejects it, it's left there with her in the cave, and she has to sit with it. She remembers what Clark says about the bright colors being there for people to identify them as good, and in the moment when the yellow sun rises and catches that logo, you just can't help it, man. You feel empowered, you feel cool, you feel excited. At this point, all that's really left to talk about is the final battle, and God, it's where two of the worst criticisms rear their head. Let's just run through it. Cara gets shot with kryptonite here to briefly paralyze her, which you could see as yet another convenient way of hindering her, but it really doesn't last that long, and its purpose is really to slow down Cara's rampage, long enough for her to have a one-on-one moment with Krem and to set up the ending. It's not like it's ridiculous for the brigands to have access to it anyway, so you can't act like it's some great plot hole. It also requires Lobo to intervene, which gives him something to do. This fight has some great moments. Cara saving the brides obviously stands out. I really appreciate how angry she is in that moment. It's also probably Lobo's best action set piece as well. But what is perhaps the single worst criticism I've seen of the movie comes during its final stretch, after Cara has been restored to full strength and begins ripping apart the brigands' tanks like paper. There's a needle drop here, you see, one that is apparently such an issue that people who call themselves serious critics were tweeting at James Gunn begging him to rescore this scene and put out an updated version in theaters, because apparently this needle drop was just that bad. The song is The Middle, a cover by Kelty Gray and Kid Motel. The fact that it's a cover is actually important. It was apparently commissioned for the movie, and I do think that makes sense because the tone and voice of this version fit the scene a lot better. And yes, the song fits the scene. To be fully clear here, the scene's obvious and explicit focus is on Ruthie. It actually calls back to the bar fight scene earlier where we follow Ruthie as she hides behind a table while Cara rips apart some thugs. This time, by contrast, Ruthie can actually see everything happening around her. This is the first time she's ever seen Cara at full power, other than a quick glimpse she got on the bus, again with her view obscured. Ruthie is observing this, literally in the middle of the battlefield, overwhelmed not only by her emotions, but by the scale of the situation. In this moment, I think the song fits very well. My impression was that it's actually calling back to another moment where we see Cara briefly after she lands on Earth, initially overwhelmed by the noise and chaos before drowning it out with her own music, a similarly upbeat and energetic song. Even if you don't think the song fits well, I want you to look me in the fucking eyes and genuinely tell me that a single song that is somewhat incongruous with the vibe you expect from the scene can be so atrocious that it warrants writing off the entire movie, that it warrants asking a CEO with no direct involvement on the movie to personally intervene and change it. The type of person who says those things unabashedly would have to be a disingenuous hack. Anyway, the aftermath of that. Cara has, at this point, slammed Krem into pavement, and Ruthie approaches him to finish him off. Cara stops her, again begging her not to, telling her that it won't bring her peace, pleading with her. This time, Ruthie listens. She lowers a sword she has spent this whole movie brandishing as a symbol of her father's revenge, and Cara embraces her. She promises to walk away and not look back, and as she does, Cara steps forward and fatally stabs Krem twice. Once for her dog, and a killing blow for the girls he stole everything from. Now, was it wrong for Cara to kill this sex trafficker who had no remorse for his actions and fully intended to continue his behavior? Who could say? If you think he was too dangerous and needed to die, she did the right thing here. If you think she shouldn't have, that she should have apprehended him somehow and had him jailed, that's actually also fine. Keep in mind, this is Cara's first major outing in a new cinematic universe, and this movie is setting the groundwork for her appearances in Man of Tomorrow and beyond. Her choosing to kill here is something that will come back to impact her later. It's why they draw explicit attention to Lobo catching it happen. Cara's entire character arc can't and shouldn't end in one movie. She shouldn't be expected to be perfect right out of the gates. In a story with sequels in mind, built in practically, it's extremely reasonable to set up further character flaws for your protagonist to overcome in the future, especially at the end of a movie after her main arc for this journey has been resolved. And this ending, pessimistic or not, is the culmination of Cara's journey in this movie. A movie about Cara being isolated, having no people. She's lived only for herself for a while, but now she's found community with Ruthie, found this young girl whose life she wants to protect, whose life she doesn't want ruined. Cara, who believes she's already damned beyond salvation, takes on the burden that she believes is right for her to take on as a hero. She takes this blow to her soul, this red mark, to allow Ruthie to live without it, to remain free of the writhing guilt of killing a man, to get to still be a girl with her life ahead of her. Cara initially entered this journey selfishly, seeking to preserve her one remaining piece of home. But in the process, it's become about more than that. Young girls have lost their lives, others living in fear. As a young woman who had her girlhood ripped away from her, Cara wants to preserve these children's innocence, their lives. Ruthie has undergone incredible tragedy, but she can still have a normal life as a normal girl, but only if her psyche isn't forever tainted by this act. Cara doesn't know how to handle this situation without someone taking the brunt of it, so she opts to do it herself. That's the best heroism she can currently muster, and it is heroism, it's self-sacrifice. As a side note, when discussing this, some people have called the comics ending ambiguous, and no, it isn't. Krem survives in the comic very clearly. It's not even meant to be ambiguous. Tom King literally said as much. So if you're saying the movie should have left it ambiguous, that is also just wrong. The rest of the movie wraps things up pretty neatly. There's a cute moment where Ruthie says she won't judge Cara if she's returning to her pub crawl, but Cara herself, being changed by the adventure, seems content with trying to make Earth into her home, setting up her future role in the DCU. I also really like she spends a little bit more time with Ruthie. That's cute. The final scene is Cara arriving at Clark's apartment where she has decided to stay, which I just really enjoy. Incredible odd couple potential here. I really hope Cara's edges aren't sanded down in Man of Tomorrow because I think this dynamic could be delightful. Please let her interact with Lois and do not make her get a job. Oh, there's also no post-credit scene. That made one guy in the theater for my second showing really mad for some reason. I don't know why. The post-credit scene in Superman was just a joke, and frankly, the MCU has been kind of fucking up that format for so long that I'm kind of relieved we didn't have some pointless scene that just exists to tease Brainiac, who we already know is coming or whatever. Anyway, that's the movie, babes. Again, I kind of skipped around a bit and didn't describe everything in detail unless I had to address a specific criticism, because I really do think the full thing deserves to be experienced. But anyway, let's review. So it goes without saying that the performances are incredible across the board here. Obviously, the standout is Millie Alcock's Cara. She's so raw and visceral and real. Every word she speaks, every drunken stumble, every pained gesture. She's angry, she's tired, she's bitter, she's confused. You can feel the weight of everything in her voice and performance, from the powerful silent scream in space to the way she says her anger will go away any day now. And our girl had to perform several scenes in a fictional language on top of all of that, still managing to inject the weight of those moments through this fantasy intonation. She's a fucking legend, and I hope we get to see her as Cara for years to come. I'm so fucking angry on her behalf about the hordes of men debating her attractiveness all over the internet. She's worth more than every one of them combined. Ruthie is played by Eve Ridley, who does an unbelievably good job at making this character feel both like she isn't a small, helpless child who it would be ridiculous to see on a quest like this, but still young enough for her impulsiveness and emotional instability to be completely understandable. Ruthie does things that could be frustrating in the hands of a worse actor. She goes against Cara's request, she throws fits, but those moments never feel irritating to watch because she's always portrayed in such a way where those actions feel understandable. She's also able to convey Ruthie as both someone stilted and formal in her speech without going over the top, as the comic's narration often does. This makes her adoption of Cara's vernacular a little more subtle, but I think the don't freak out moment really helps with that. She manages to be a good match for Cara, neither the child so out of her element that she needs total protection, nor more mature than Cara herself and functionally carrying the duo. She and Cara complement each other perfectly, and I really think that comes down to the performers' chemistry. Jason Momoa's Lobo is fine. He's hardly the highlight of the movie for me, but you can really tell how much fun he's having, and that makes me happy. From the second old Jimmy Gunn got his reins to DC, he wanted to play this character, and I'm happy he got to do it sooner rather than later. His excitement was all over the marketing for the movie as well, and you can just tell he's in his element playing him, so that alone makes the performance worth it. Obviously, Krem is meant to be hateable, and boy, he is, thanks in no small part to a wonderfully sickening portrayal by Matthias Schoenaerts. Krem's design is the one that underwent the most changes, but I'm extremely impressed at how well his personality comes across even in the heavy armor. His opening scene with Ruthie's parents really shows off everything you need to know, this brutish man acting juvenile and petty because he knows everyone around him lives in fear of him, exemplified by him just demanding and completely ruining a whole pie. It's just a really perfect introduction. Krem always feels giddy about the atrocities he's committing, which makes him extremely unlikable and helps justify the choice to kill him at the end. He's truly somebody who has no interest in changing. Absolutely great stuff here. David Cornsweet isn't in this movie a ton, but it goes without saying that his performance as Clark is so electric that he makes every second he's around better. Every little tick and mannerism is so perfect that it's just delightful to see him do his thing, and he bounces off Cara really well in their scenes together. You really get the sense that he wants the best for her, but is just totally unsure of how to talk to her, which contrasts well with how we see him talk to almost everybody else in his life. Some surprise standouts as well come in the form of David Krumholtz as Zor-El and Emily Beecham as Allura Inze, Cara's parents. They have the demanding job of not only imparting the movie's big morals, but also doing so entirely in Kryptonian, and they both do fantastically at it. Obviously, Zor-El gets a bit more screen time and a fantastic scene before he sends Cara away, but Allura's death scene and the message she leaves Cara with really stuck with me. The movie's original music is also all pretty fantastic. The Supergirl suite by Claudia Sarn is strong and energetic and has a really nice and identifiable motif for Cara that I hope continues in her other appearances. I absolutely see it becoming a theme as iconic as the Superman motif. I've talked a lot about this movie's visual style, but once again, I think it was done very well. The movie kind of centers around bars and pubs as the characters visit several, and basically every single character in the main cast is drawn to those more seedy and rundown locations, so it works. We get to see a good variety in them, and they make for fun set pieces. I also really like the space bus. It and the space pirates Cara fights there using teleporters creates a really fun fight scene as well. Almost every individual fight scene in this movie has a distinct vibe to it, and I really enjoy them. I also want to give my highest praise to the costume designers. Everything about Cara's fit is so good. The faded blondie shirt, the messy trench coat, the big sunglasses, the boots. She's so fucking pretty in this movie, and once again, I really, really hope this style is a consistent element of her character. And unlike the people whining that she wasn't in the costume for long enough, I honestly really adored every second of Cara in her casual clothes because it's so characterizing and cool, and I'm just gushing at this point, but God, she's so pretty. It's so good. She has cool earrings also. Alright, okay, I'm done. The movie was not received well, obviously. Initial critical reception and general sentiment in the time since have been middling to negative. A lot of people praising Millie's performance, but disregarding the movie and hoping she'll do better in her next appearance. I resent that a lot. Criticisms of this movie's pacing, editing, its score, its characters, its deviation from the source material all just ring so hollow for me. I thought this movie was exceptional, and everyone I've shown it to has felt similarly, so why? Why the overwhelming consensus of negativity? Well, I won't pretend there isn't an Occam's razor here, but I also don't think the early negative press storm helped it. The far-right misogynistic hate campaign, the embarrassing critical reviews, the opinions YouTubers put out there that were seamlessly adopted by their viewers, but all of that centers around the obvious, doesn't it? Supergirl is not about a man. There are no male main characters save for the antagonist, who is both utterly abhorrent without remorse and who ultimately isn't the focus of the movie. The prominent supporting male character is decidedly sparse, and the story has very little interest in these girls' relationship to men outside of how it defines their own personal journeys. It sounds so simple, so unbelievably black and white to say that that's where all this division and hate come from. And sure, some of it also came from comic book purism, but I really do think a lot of it came down to this. Men, especially men in the comic space, have not reckoned with their misogyny. Every woman I've talked to about this movie has liked it, and yet the men reviewing it can't stand it. I just can't imagine why that is until I pan over the sea of reviews full of mask-off misogyny. I'm making this video just because I got fed up, because it bothers me to see these views amplified and spread, because I can't fathom the way the space has gotten so bad that a story like this is treated this way. I'm not expecting this video to convince anyone to see the movie, both because the kind of arguments against it aren't especially susceptible to change, and because I took long enough putting this together that it is too late to see the movie in theaters. I highly doubt my third attempt at a video essay was going to substantially impact those box office numbers anyway, but I wanted to say it. I wanted to say that I love Supergirl, that it meant something to me. I've had a rough summer, but I won't ever forget it. I won't forget the joy this movie brought me, the inspiration I felt from it. I wanted to say that, to me, Supergirl 2026 is perfect. Also, if anybody is telling you this movie sucks and they're unironically excited for Avengers Doomsday, I think you can just write them off pretty comfortably.